challengers! Today, we're entering the cell power arena to uncover the secret behind how our cells make energy. The game is called the electron transport system, the final and most powerful stage of cellular respiration. Electron transport system, also known as the electron transport chain, ETC, is the final and most important stage of cellular respiration, where the majority of ATP, our body's energy currency, is produced. In simpler terms, its frequencies and current cycles prepare the fuel. The electron transport system is where the engine finally runs and makes power. It happens in the inner mitochondrial membrane in eukaryotic cells and the plasma membrane of prokaryotes. To create this game, we must unlock all the levels. Key components of ETS, the power ups, the electron pack, the protein garden, and the final and grand reward, ATP. Let's begin. Let's meet our first player. Level 1, the stage of the game, and meet the characters. Player 1, you're up.
Okay, before we play, let's introduce the setting and the key player of this system. Our journey starts inside the inner mitochondrial membrane, the exact location where the electron transport system takes place. Think of this inner membrane like the battlefield where a relay of proton complexes is lined up. Their job? To transfer electron from carrier and use the energy to pump proton inside the intermembrane space. This sets the stage of building a proton gradient, a kind of stored energy. Without this location, none of the following steps can even begin. So remember, ETS happens in the inner mitochondrial membrane, and its main purpose is to create a proton gradient to power ATP synthesis. Before we go step by step, let's meet the key player of this electron transport system. First, electron donors, NADH and PADH2, which bring high energy electron from earlier processes. Next, protein complexes, and there are 4. Complex 1, NADH dehydrogenase. Complex 2, succinate dehydrogenase. Complex 3, cytochrome BC1. And complex 4, cytochrome C oxidase. Electron carriers, coenzyme Q and cytochrome C, which act like shuttle, moving electron between complexes. Next, final electron acceptor. Oxygen, it combines with electrons and protons to form water. And finally, proton. These are pumped across the inner membrane to build a proton gradient like charging a battery. Remember, the whole system works like a relay race where electrons are passed from one complex to another, releasing energy that pumps proton.
Nice thorough explanation. But where do these electrons actually go? Time to follow their adventure. Player 2, it's your turn to unlock level 2, the journey of electrons.
Thanks, Game Master. It's a bit tricky, right? Let's make it simple. We trace the journey, or the step-by-step process of electrons through the electron transport chain. But before we begin with the electron transport system, it's important to remember the role of NADH and PADH2 during the cellular respiration. And remember, cellular respiration has 3 main stages, namely glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and the ETC that we are talking about. These NADH and PADH2 are like energy carriers that we have been collecting during the first 2 stages of cellular respiration, the glycolysis and the Krebs cycle, where they store high energy electrons taken from food molecules we intake. And now that we've reached the final stage of respiration, the ETC, these carriers will deliver their electrons to the chain. And this is where all the stored energy they've been holding will finally be utilized to produce ATP, the main energy currency of the cell. So let's break it down. First, the NADH from the previous process enters a complex 1, where it donates 2 electrons. The complex 1 uses the energy from the NADH to pump protons into the intermembrane space. Next, the FAD-H2 accumulated from the previous process also enters a complex 2 where it donates electrons. But the difference is, the complex 2 does not pump protons. And after that, the electron from complex 1 and 2 move to coenzyme Q, which carries them to complex 3. The coenzyme Q is a lipid-soluble carrier that collects electrons from both complex 1 and 2, where it shuttles or transfers these electrons through the inner membrane to complex 3. Next, at complex 3, more electrons are passed and 4 more protons are pumped out into the intermembrane space. Next to it, the cytochrome C carries electrons to complex 4, a small protein that travels across the intermembrane space, carrying electrons from complex 3 to complex 4. And electrons traveling through the electron transport chain can't just keep moving forever. They need a final place to go. And this is where oxygen comes in. At complex 4, it accepts electrons from the cytochrome C and transfers them into oxygen, forming water, and pumps 2 to 4 protons across the membrane as part of this process. The oxygen we breathe acts as the final electron acceptor, and it takes in those electrons along with some hydrogen ions, which is the protons, from the matrix, and together they form water, or the H2O. This step is very important because without oxygen, the electron transport chain would stop working, like cars stuck in traffic with nowhere to go. If the chain stops, your cells can't make enough ATP, and you wouldn't survive. That's why oxygen is essential here, which is why we need it to live. Meanwhile, the pumping of protons across complex 1, 3, and 4 creates a high concentration of protons outside the inner membrane. This proton buildup is called the proton gradient, and it stores potential energy like water behind a dam. Proton gradient, the buildup. Now there are a lot of protons outside the intermembrane space, and only few inside the matrix. This creates a high to low concentration difference, just like water piling up behind the dam. Naturally, particles like to move from high concentration to low concentration, which is called diffusion. The protons really want to go back into the matrix, where there are fewer of them. Up to this point, even though electrons have been moving and protons have been pumped, ATP hasn't been yet. Here's where the exciting part begins. The protons that were pushed into the intermembrane space now rush back into the matrix. And ATP synthase is like the gate and turbine, since the protons can't just pass anywhere, and they must go through a special protein, which is the ATP synthase. The ATP synthase is like a tiny water wheel or turbine that as the protons flow through it, it spins, making ATP, or the energy conversion. And that spinning action provides the energy needed to join ADP with a phosphate group. As when ADP plus P are combined, it forms ATP, the main energy currency of the cell. And thanks to the proton gradients and the ATP synthase, the cell makes lots of ATP. Each NADH and FADH2 that drop off electrons early help set up to this process by building the gradient. In short, the ETC builds up a crowd of protons on one side, and these protons diffuse back down through ATP synthase. And the movement powers ATP synthase to attach a phosphate to ADP, creating ATP. Again, don't forget, the NADH enters a complex 1 where it donates 2 electrons and pumps protons. Then, the FADH2 enters a complex 2 where it also donates electrons, but no protons pump here. Then, the coenzyme Q carries electrons to complex 3, and in the complex 3, it pumps 4 more protons and transfers electrons from coenzyme Q to the cytochrome C. Then, the cytochrome C carries electrons from complex 3 to complex 4, and it pumps more protons up top. And in the complex 4, oxygen accepts electrons plus protons that forms water. Then the ETC pumps a lot of hydrogen ions, or H+, to one side of the membrane, and this makes a high concentration outside and low inside. And just like in diffusion, the hydrogen ions want to move back where there are fewer of them, and they can only go back through a special door called ATP synthase. And as the ions pass through the ATP synthase, it works like a tiny turbine machine. And this machine uses their movement to stick a phosphate onto ADP, turning it into ATP. In simplest way, think of it that the ETC is like filling one side of a dome with water, which is the H+, and the water flows back through a turbine, which is called the ATP synthase, and that spinning makes electricity, which is the ATP. That's it. Back to you, Game Master.
The electrons have done their job, but what about those protons we've been pumping? They've been stacking up like a coin, ready to be spent. Player 3, unlock level 3, the power generator.
Now the protons want to flow back in, but the only way is through the ATP synthase, the cell turbine. Here's where the magic happens. As the protons that were pumped out want to move back inside the mitochondrial matrix, because of the concentration difference, they return to the special protein called the ATP synthase. As the protons flow back, ATP synthase rotates like a turbine, producing ATP from ADP and inorganic phosphate. Each NADH contributes enough energy to make about 3 ATP molecules, and each FADH2 makes about 2 ATP molecules. This process of proton flowing back through the ATP synthase to power ATP production is called chemiosmosis, which you learned in the first group. Without the electron transport system, chemiosmosis cannot occur, and our cells would produce very little ATP. And again, don't forget, as the protons rush back, ATP synthase spins and converts ADP plus PI to ATP. And remember, each NADH yields about 3 ATP, while the FADH2 yields about 2 ATP. This step is called the chemiosmosis. It's how the majority of ATP is being produced.
We're almost at the finish line. Let's see how many ATP we've won in this cellular game. Player 4, unlock the final level.
The big question: how much ATP does the electron transport system produce? And the electrons carried by NADH and FADH2, that is, can produce around 34 ATP molecules. Add that to the 2 ATP from glycolysis and 2 from the Krebs cycle, and we reach about 38 ATP total per glucose molecule. This makes that is the most important stage of cellular respiration. It generates the bulk of the cell energy, and remember, without oxygen acting as the final electron acceptor, the whole system backed up and shut down. That's why oxygen is essential for aerobic life. So the ATS is like the MVP of energy production, giving cells the energy to survive and function. To sum up the game, first, electrons travel from NADH or FADH2 to complex 1 to 4. Second, protons pump to creating protons gradient. Third, oxygen accepts electrons, which yield water. And lastly, ATP synthase use the gradient to bulk ATP. Don't forget, without ATPs, cells can't make enough ATP to survive. Portion like cyanide block complex 4, shutting the system down completely. So yes, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, but the electron transport system is the powerhouse of the powerhouse. Back to you, Game Master.
And that completes our adventure in the electron transport system. Thanks for playing and learning with us. Together we explored the setting inside the mitochondria, the power-ups of NAND-H and FUN-H2, and the electron pathway through complexes, the protein garden and chemiosmosis, and finally, the grand prize, ATP. The electron transport system is more than just a chain. It's the powerhouse of life. Until next time, keep charging your knowledge batteries. See you soon as we are level complete.